Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar where we'll explore permanent protection visas and some other pathways to staying permanently in Australia. My name is Melinda Mann and I'm the Program Manager of the IAAAS program at Settlement Services International. This is a program I'll speak about a little bit later on. Just before we start, on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see a white box with the word floor. That's where you can select the language you wish to listen to the webinar in. You can select English, Hindi, Burmese, or Spanish. Please make that selection now. You will see the same visuals, but hear the presentation in the language of your choice. We would like to thank 2M Language Services for making this Kudo platform available for us today. If you need technical support throughout the presentation, you can put a message in the chat function and our technical support team will try to assist you. There is a button that says request to speak. We would ask you if you could please not press that button as we won't be having participants speak during this webinar. However, you may have some questions throughout the presentation. If you do have questions, please write your questions in the chat function and enter the language you're writing the question in, if it's in a language other than English. This will allow our interpreters to read out the question later in the session. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Questions about personal circumstances cannot be answered in this forum. Where we do not have time to answer all questions, we'll follow up via an email. Before we officially begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet. For me, this is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who have cared for this land since time immemorial. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and commit ourselves to a future with reconciliation and renewal at its heart. As one of the main hosts today, I'd like to introduce you briefly to Settlement Services International, commonly referred to as SSI. We're a community organisation and a social business who support newcomers and vulnerable community members to reach their full potential. This could be through our refugee and asylum seeker programs, disability services, employment and entrepreneurship programs, arts and culture events, or even through our innovative multicultural foster care program. We have a physical presence in Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland, and have programs which run nationally across Australia. If you would like to find out more about our organisation and how we might be able to support your community, please visit ssi.org.au. Now I would like to hand over to Ramtin Taudi from Playfair Visa and Migration Services, who is our migration lawyer co-hosting this evening's event. Ramtin has over 9 years of client service management experience, including consulting on skilled visas, refugee and family visas, citizenship matters, as well as appeals to the tribunals and the federal court. He has previously acted as the head of refugee matters on both onshore and offshore applications under IAAAS, where he was responsible for review and finalisation of all immigration matters and acted as the liaison officer to the Office of the Department of Immigration. He completed his law studies in New Zealand before he was admitted as a barrister and solicitor to the High Court of New Zealand, and currently as a solicitor to the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Ramtin is adept in Farsi, Persian, and is also able to communicate in Dari. Thank you, Ramtin.
Thank you, Melinda, for this wonderful introduction. That was, thank you. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where I am sitting, the Dak and Jung people. And so the next thing that I want to look at, or initially look at, is about Playfair. Now, Playfair started in 1988, so it's been going on for quite some time, and we do everything immigration. Anything you can think of immigration, we do it, and we pride ourselves in the services that we have provided. Now, what distinguishes Playfair from other migration agencies and immigration law firms is that Playfair is one of a handful of providers where we were engaged by the Department of Immigration to provide services for certain refugees and asylum seekers who came to Australia, and that gave us an extensive amount of experience to be able to deal with various matters. So what that did was it gave us a lot of experience to be able to dispense with lots of different people from different backgrounds and be able to deal with people from different matters. So that's what sets us apart. Today, we are going to speak about, I guess, 4 different topics. Melinda, if you can please, next slide. Now, those 2, the 4 different topics are the student visa pathway options, skilled visa pathway options, protection visa, and then we'll go to questions and answers. That's what we'll be doing, and each of these sections have got different areas. So let's go to topic 1. Topic 1 is about student visas, and the pathway.
Apologies, I've got the the wrong slide set up.
That's okay.
I'll get back to it in 1 second. I'll just bring it up.
Not a problem. No worries. So while you do that, I'm going to speak about a few things in regards to the skilled pathway. Now, the first thing that I wanted to let you know is that immigration is the fastest changing area of law in Australia. Now, incidentally, that makes it the hardest area of law to be working in for lawyers. The law is relatively easy, but what keeps us on the edge is that it constantly is changing. And it's what sets it apart from other areas of law is that it's susceptible to politics a lot more than any other area of law. And so what that does effectively, the implications of that is that we have to constantly be on the edge and be up to date with the law. And so that's what makes it difficult. The other thing is that when it comes to the immigration law is that when we try to provide advice, we have to work backwards, not forwards, when it comes to visas. And one of the things that it requires is that it requires us to be forward-looking and try to predict the changes that come. Now, it's not always easy because sometimes the department, as well as the government, surprises us, and we see that happening every now and then. Once every couple of years, we do get surprised with the law and the changes because they don't tell us in advance what's happening. So, in that way, because of this, hopefully by then, is the slides up, Melinda, by any chance? Ready by any?
I'm getting there. It's
Okay.
just showing the one, the front slide. It's not. What can you see on your screen? I'm really sorry about this, participant.
That's all right. That's fine. We are seeing the first one. I think you might have to leave the slide, as in depart from the page and then come back to it again. So you need to quit and then come back. That might be the best way. But in the meantime, I'll just keep going. And so essentially, when we try to advise with regards to how to predict or be able to provide advice to clients, we try to, I tell them, okay, let's work backwards. What is the end result that you want? And hopefully the law wouldn't have changed by then. So when it comes to, and I'm hoping that slide will come on so that I can show you the pathway. But once we get there, that slide will also be at the end. So when it comes to student visas, most students are hopeful that they would become permanent residents in Australia. And so the first advice that I give them is, okay, all right, rather than studying your preferred topic and which institution you want to study and what you want to do, let's look at what the Australian law says and what the requirements are. So there are a few things to take into consideration. And those things are, there are only a few occupations that can lead to permanent residency. There are very few institutions that provide the courses that can lead to permanent residency. Some institutions that are not in, and so that's the slide that I was looking for. So some institutions that are in regional area and in different states, such as Western Australia, may not be a good option for a person to study in. And that's because such states such as Western Australia, they don't provide a lot of pathway for permanent residence, whereas other states such as South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, they might be much more amenable. New South Wales, of course, is one of those states, but different rules apply. So studying in a regional area, that would be a bonus. And so we work backwards through that way. So let's go to the next slide. Now, student visas. If you are already on a student visa in Australia, you would have been already met the eligibility criteria. So I'll go through this very quickly. You must be enrolled in a registered course, and the institution that offers that course must be registered. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got the visa to begin with. You must satisfy what we call a genuine temporary entrant requirement. What that means is that if the department finds out that you intend to become permanent resident or apply for any other visa other than what you intend to do, and that is to genuinely study, they may cancel your visa. So you must be a genuine student when you come here. There are implications for that, because if you're not a genuine student and you're here to, for example, the primary reason is to work, then they don't like that. The Australian government doesn't like it. And it also affects Australia's international relations for those countries, for those students. So for that reason, that condition is there and they take it very seriously. You must also have English, meet the English criteria. You must have genuine access to funds. Now, the access to fund depends on, and it keeps going up with inflation. At the moment, there's a set rate of about 20,000 per year you must show. You must at least at this stage only show 1 year worth of funds, but it also depends on how much your qualification is going to cost. You must have health insurance, and you must meet the health and character. Now to the next slide. At this stage, if you want to study something and halfway through you go, okay, I want to change my mind. I cannot study anymore what I want to study. You can do that, but I recommend that you do that at the earliest stage in your studying career. Government doesn't like it when you keep changing courses. It demonstrates that you're not a genuine student, and so your visa can be cancelled. You can apply for an extension. You can apply for a new visa, but what you cannot do is extend your current visa. So you will need to obtain a new confirmation of enrollment if your study has not finished, and you need to apply for a new visa to the Department of Immigration. You also need to show the same things that you did before, such as demonstrating health, financials, things like that. Now, let's look at COVID-19 situation. COVID-19 has brought about a very unique situation to Australia. And so there are some concessions given by the Australian government to the students, and these are exemptions to the working conditions. These exemptions are only in limited situations and for a limited time. So if you're going to take advantage of these, please make sure that you do not exceed what is in the rules. Even if your employer says, "Oh, can you please, extend this, or can you do more?" You should be saying no, because at the end of the day, it may not affect you now, but in future visa applications that you apply, they may tell you that you have breached your previous visa condition, and because of that, we are not going to give you a visa. So they'll refuse your visa. So to avoid that, I highly recommend that you continue to comply. Now, to the next slide, the other thing that you need to note is that these temporary measures will only last as long as COVID-19 is going on. Now, we don't know when that will finish. They haven't advised us yet, but you must make sure that you continue to maintain your course enrollment, make sure that you continue to study, because if you don't do that, you can't continue to be able to work. So, for example, you can say to the department, now that I'm working full-time in a health care environment, I will not be able to study in the same way that I did before. You can't do that. It's part of your condition of your visa that you continue to study, even if you're working full-time. Now, let's look at student visa conditions. Your student visa will have a number of conditions attached to it. Some of these are very important. Sometimes you might think it's a bit unfair. Well, there is a reason why they're there. They're there to protect you. They're also there to protect your parents. Some of you, or parents, might be funding your visa. So what has happened is some people come here, they keep changing course, and then the parents come back and say, well, why didn't you advise me or take care of this? So some of these conditions are there because they don't want to create an international incident, but also at the same time, they want to protect things such as Australia's workforce and the pay rate. So that's why they are there. Now, let's look at, in the next slide, we can look at a few specific conditions, such as the work limitation. You must not work more than 40 hours a fortnight. That means that you are limited to those 40 hours, unless, of course, you're doing higher education. Now, just be careful. Just because you're doing masters does not necessarily mean that you're exempt. Only a few master's students who are doing research and PhD students are exempt from this. The next condition, let's look at what 40 hours means. There is a flexibility with that. It just means that you can work. You can go to the next slide. What that means is that sometimes you can work 1 hour per week, and then the 39 hours could be in your second week. You have that flexibility how you want, but you are limited to the 40 hours per fortnight. You can split it 20-20 or 10-30, but you must maintain that. Now, sometimes you might think, they're not going to check. What I find is that when the person applies for next set of visas, such as work visas, or when they apply for permanent residence, that's when the department checks whether you have complied with your student visa. And that's when sometimes a lot of people provide documents that contradicts this, their limitation. And so the department says, well, you haven't complied, we're going to cancel your visa or refuse your visa. So just watch out for that. The next two conditions that I want to talk about are meeting the course requirements as well as maintaining eligibility. Now, meeting course requirements. That is where I see a lot of people get cancelled. Their visas get cancelled. If a person doesn't meet course requirements, the institution that they're studying is obligated to report to the department, and the department will cancel a person's visa. What I suggest in such a situation is that if you face such a situation, or potentially going to face such a situation, the first thing you need to do is to organize an appointment with a competent advisor or a lawyer who will be able to assist you to get out of the cancellation process. Now, if you leave it too late, because the time frame for response is very small, unfortunately, it's very difficult to assist you. And I've had many people who've, the moment they receive their cancellation notice, they've come to us and we've advised them what to do, and that extended their chances of not being cancelled in the long term by 90%. That's a huge amount of difference compared to a person who comes to us in the last minute or after the cancellation has happened. The next thing is you must maintain eligibility. That means you must continue to be able to meet the requirements that you originally got the visa for, such as you must stay in the course of study, you must have your financial resources, and you must continue to meet the conditions. If you don't, the department can cancel your visa. Now, a few things about student visa. These are some things that I guess that I can advise you. It's outside of the law, but these are things that are practical advice that we can tell you. Now, first thing, you can change your course, but you must do so at the earliest possible time, because the more frequent you change your course, and the later in your studies you change your course, the more likely it is that the department might find you that you're not a genuine student. Second, you must ensure that what you're studying, if you're looking for a pathway to permanent residence, has a pathway to permanent residence. And by doing so, you must seek advice from a competent professional. And they'll be able to tell you what you're studying is not very good for your future as a permanent resident. For example, there are lots of students that come here and they say, we are studying accounting. Now, accounting is one of those occupations that are in high demand, but also there is a huge amount of supply, which means that the number of students graduating versus the jobs out there doesn't equal. There's more people graduating than there are people that are jobs there. Yes, so there is a lot of demand, but at the same time, there's twice as much students graduating. So it's not a very good option. And so what we do is we try to find another alternative option for those students, because people study, they get to the place where they want to apply for permanent residence, and they find they don't meet the criteria. The other thing that I would recommend that a student does is, whatever they're studying, to try and find a part-time job, even if it means working voluntarily in the occupation that they're studying. Why? Because most employers, they like people who have hands-on experience. People with no experience are not hired. Therefore, it hampers your chances of permanent residence. So these are the tricks that I do recommend that you follow. There are much more than that you need to follow. It also depends on what course you're taking. Let's go to topic 2. Topic 2 is about temporary graduate and employer-nominated visas. It's basically the pathway to permanent residence. Now, 2 things that I need to say before we start this topic. Australia has changed its rules. Before, it was easy to move from a graduate position, once you have finished your studies, from a graduate position, to move to a permanent residence visa or a temporary residence visa, where it would lead to a pathway to permanent residence. It is much more difficult now, because most employers and visas that lead to permanent residence require not only qualifications, but also at least 2 years of experience. So what the Australian government has done is provided a number of visas that are in between until a person gets their permanent residence, if they want to apply for permanent residence. Now, these graduate visas are not for you to do whatever you want to do. These visas are specifically made for you to work in your occupation. What I normally find in my professional experience is that most people, once they finish their studies and get the temporary graduate visa, they go and work as Uber drivers, whatever that's easy to get. or they work in fast food restaurants, but not in the area where they have studied. That really hampers their chances of getting permanent residence. So I know it's difficult, but the earlier you work in a voluntary position in an organization as a student and gradually become a paid employee, even part-time, yes, it is difficult, but that's the way to do it, and the more chances of success you might have. So let's go to the next slide and talk about the temporary graduate visa. There are two types. One type is for those who study bachelor's degree or higher. This visa allows students to, once they have completed their studies, to stay in Australia for a period of about 2 years to work in the field of their excuse me, education, so that they become experienced. Now, like I said, there are two streams. One is the graduate work stream, and then there is a post-study stream, and there's a difference between the two. The next slide will tell us about the graduate work stream. So you must be 50 years of age. Melinda, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So you must be 50 years of age. Now, all of these conditions that are outlined here, they also apply if you're applying for permanent or temporary visas, mostly permanent visas. So I know that the conditions are a bit tough, but at the same time, you won't be able to transition to permanent residence anyway if you don't meet these criteria. So you must have high English requirements. You must meet the health and character requirements, and you must also apply for this visa within the 6 months of the completion of your visa. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the work-study stream is for people who have finished their bachelor's degree. You can see the list of the courses that you must have finished. This visa is valid between 2 to 4 years, depending on the type of education you have undertaken. And it's not limited to a particular occupation. So you can study whatever you want and apply for this visa. So you don't have to specifically be limited to a specific occupation. However, the next visa, the other stream of the visa, which is in the next slide, is limited to a number of skilled occupations, but the study is also limited. It's for people who have completed a diploma in degree or a trade qualification. So it's not limited to bachelor's degree. It's below bachelor's degrees for those who finished certificates and things like that. Those individuals can still apply for this graduate visa, but they're limited to a number of occupations that are on the skilled list. And also the term of the visa is limited to 18 months. So they don't have 2 years as much as others. So the higher the qualification, the better it is for you in terms of your studies, transitioning to studies. Now, this graduate study, temporary graduate visa that I mentioned, is one pathway that bridges you between a student visa and a work visa. So this is something that you can apply for, but the thing that I would recommend is that when you apply for this visa, you must work in the occupation that you have applied for. Only and only then you'll have a pathway to permanent residence. Let's look at the other temporary visa, the 482 visa. Now, 482 visa is a visa that most people, it's the most common visa in Australia. It's a visa that most companies bring people in Australia to work for them. You can also go on this visa, but the issue is you must have at least 2 years of full-time experience or part-time equivalent. So this is where it becomes important that while you're studying, that you work in the occupation that you are studying, and also when you graduate, that you graduate and you work immediately in the occupation that you're studying. If you do that, and if your employer likes you, they can employ you in this visa, and that has a pathway to permanent residence as a general rule. Not all visas, not all occupations have a pathway, but if you have a pathway, this is the way to go about it. And so if you don't have those 2 years of experience, you will not be able to get this visa. So how this visa works, if you have if you are eligible in an occupation that is on the medium to long-term list, that's a pathway to PR, you get this visa, and after 3 years of working for the company, you can apply for permanent residence. The next slide, in the next slide, you will see that you know, there are certain things you must meet. There's English language, there's skills and qualifications that you must meet, and you must have 2 years of experience. If you don't have it, you cannot apply for this visa. This is why a lot of graduates can't go onto this visa and are prevented. And so if they get the 485 visa that we mentioned before, that gives them a chance to be able to get this visa. Now, this visa has a number of criteria. You must have a company sponsoring you, and the company must be able to lodge a sponsorship application, that there is a nomination position. There are a set number of rules to meet, including a set salary that you must have, there's a tax that the employer must pay, and then with the visa condition, you must, you know, provide your identity, you must show that you're healthy, and that you meet the character situation, and you meet the skills. So this visa has a number of criteria that must be met, and these are the criteria. Now, let's go to the next slide. For those who don't necessarily meet the 482 visa criteria, sometimes they're able to go on a 407 training visa. This is a very tricky visa to get because the department is very heavy-handed. They're very specific with what you can do to get this visa. So this visa is for individuals, for companies who have a official training for those that come in. So it's for people who are young, who are a graduate, and they're coming to Australia to be trained. And so you can spend some time to be trained, and that training is enough to get you to the 482 visa. It can count towards that. But the catch is that training must be official, which means that it can't just be on-the-job training. So just something to watch out for. Now, let's go to the next slide. The purpose of this visa is to improve the skills for a person to be able to get a job either in Australia or go back to their country. So the purpose of this visa originally was that a company that is multinational and they want to train people, they can bring people in Australia to train, and then they can send them off, or they can keep them in Australia. That's the original purpose of this visa. But some people can also use it for improving their skills so that they can apply for the 482 visa. And I said before, it requires a work-based structured training. It can't just be any type of training. And the business must provide the structured training program in their application. Let's go to the next slide. Now, some people can come from overseas who've graduated from overseas to come to Australia to study for this visa. That is acceptable. However, there are a number of criteria that they have to also meet. Now, one thing that I want to make it known is that the workplace structure, it requires at least 30 hours a week of training, and 70% of training can be done at the workplace. So that is one of the criteria that has to be met, and there is no way around it. All right, let's go to the training visa slide, the last visa, I think, the last slide. There are a number of criteria for this to get to this visa. The person must be 18. They must be nominated in the same way as the other visas, such as the 482 visa, by a company. There is a number of other criteria, such as the English, character, and health insurance that must be met when applying for this visa. All right, let's go to the next slide. The 186 visa, the permanent visa. So you've gone through student visa, you've gone through the 485, the graduate visa, and either from the graduate visa, you can go to this permanent visa, or you didn't meet the criteria, you went through the training visa, or through to the skilled visa, the 482 visa, and you've worked for your company and you're now ready to become permanent resident. This is the visa that you apply for. This is one of the main visas for which people become permanent resident. Now, there are 3 streams for this visa, which 3 of them we'll discuss, but there's 2 pathways to get to this visa. One is the temporary transition. So when you go on a 482 visa, you work for the company 3 out of the 4 years, and then you can apply. Alternatively, you can apply under the direct entry stream, which doesn't require those 3 years, but it requires a skills assessment. Now, skills assessment is basically, there are a number of institutions in Australia, and what they do is they assess your qualifications and your skills and your experience, and they will say, yes, the person is qualified for this visa. Now, let's look at the labor agreement stream. For those that don't necessarily meet certain criteria, some companies do apply for a labor agreement stream. I don't want to go too much into detail into the labor agreement stream because it is very specific. It requires negotiation with the department, and we've successfully done a few of those, a number of these, and so it is a very niche market, and so I don't want to cover it. But let's just continue to the other areas. But I just wanted to let you know that if you don't meet certain criteria, and if your employer is really willing to sponsor you, there is a pathway available to you. It's not all lost, but there are a number of things that the employer must show before they can get this. And that includes, them not being able to hire an Australian. Now, as a general rule, you must be 45 years of age to apply for permanent residence. Everyone must be 45 years of age. If you're over 45 years, you cannot meet that criteria. And you must also meet the English criteria, English and health. Now, let's look at the 2 other visas, the last 2 other permanent visas. I don't personally like these visas, and the reason is because they're subject to changes a lot. So sometimes they are closed, sometimes they're open. The last 2 visas that I'm going to talk about are the visas that are points-based. They're not dependent on someone sponsoring you, but it requires you to have higher points than everyone else. And so there are 2 types of these visas, the 189, that's for the whole of Australia, and then there is 190, which each state it's state-based. And 2 features about this visa. Number 1 feature is that this visa requires you to submit an expression of interest, EOI. And what that is that it's like sending your resume to an employer in the same way you send an expression of interest to the department, and the people with the highest points get accepted by the department and are invited to apply for the visa. The second feature of this visa is that when you apply for an expression of interest, that is not a visa. So a positive thing about this is that you can be in or outside of Australia. There's a lot of people that come from outside of Australia and they get this visa. But a negative thing about this is if you have graduated from an institution in Australia and you apply for an expression of interest, you haven't applied for a visa. So if your visa runs out, you must depart Australia. Otherwise, you're in breach of your visa condition. So just something to watch out for. Let's go through the 189 visa itself. This is a visa, and this is in the this is a visa for invited workers with skills to live in Australia. Like I said, you must meet the points test for this, and this is why when we do the assessment for individuals to have a higher chance of becoming permanent residents, when we go through it, we try to go through the point system and give them options to maximize their points so that when it comes to this, they will be able to have a greater chance of becoming permanent resident. So this is why we work backwards. And this is when I said at the beginning of this session that we look at advice and we provide it backwards, is because we look at what the ultimate goal is and how much points you can get. So just a bit of, I guess, hint, the more points you have, the more points you're able to collect, the higher the chances you have to be able to apply for a visa. And certain states are better at providing you with options to become permanent resident. So this is why I recommend that you seek legal advice at the very beginning of your studies, and that will give you a better chance. And to the next slide, the 190 visa is very similar to the 189, except that 190 has got its own occupation list and it's got its own rules, but each state has got its occupation list and its own rules. So this is for a state-based. So a state invites you. But otherwise, everything else is the same. The only thing that I would say is that some states are not very good, such as Western Australia, and other states are more welcoming. New South Wales used to be the best state, but now it's relatively on par with other states. There are very, they've recently changed the rules and have become very much restrictive. And so again, going back to what I said before, when you're choosing to study, it would be good to look at this option and see which occupations are more likely to give you permanent residence and then work backwards. And so we end where we started at the beginning in the chart that I was showing you. So the pathway from student visas to permanent residence visas is that you study a course that is on the skilled occupation list, that gives you a chance to permanent residence. And if you have already started a course that is not good, that doesn't have a chance to permanent residence, then you can change it. And I recommend that you change it as soon as possible. Now, once you're studying, I recommend, again, that you work in your field. And if you don't work in your field, at least volunteer in your field. That gives you a higher chance of becoming employed and hired. Once you graduate, you go on a graduate visa. That will give you a chance to upskill, and also it gives you a chance to be hired by an employer in Australia. And then that gives you a chance to either go on a 482 visa, which gives you work for a chance to become permanent resident, or you can apply for one of the point skill based. So that's the pathway to permanent residence. But again, like I said before, the best way to look at this is backwards. What are the occupations that gives you permanent residence option? Now, at the end of this, we do have questions and answers session. So if you have any questions with regards to this, stick around and we will discuss it. But I do have a topic 3 to discuss, and that is it's going to be very different to what we discussed, which is the permanent protection visas. Why permanent protection? We're not going to talk about temporary protection visas here. Temporary protection visas are a different class of visas, but we're going to look at specifically permanent protection visas. Why permanent protection? Well, permanent protection are given to people who are in Australia and have a visa currently. If you are in Australia and have a valid visa, you can apply for a permanent protection visa. But before I start, I want to tell you one thing. The most important thing you can do before deciding to apply for a protection visa is to seek legal advice as early as possible and as soon as possible. Not just with anyone, with a competent lawyer who is able to provide you with advice, an experienced, competent lawyer who's able to give you advice and tell you whether you should apply. If I had a penny for every time there was a person who had been advised to apply for a protection visa or was recommended by their friends, and now they're stuck in a situation where they can't get out of, so what I do recommend that you do is seek advice and before you embark on anything, because there are a lot of people who have better options than applying for a protection visa. So, what is the definition of a refugee? Now, one thing that I want to tell you before I start this is what I'm about to say, you shouldn't regard it as legal advice. and form your views or form your mind to apply for protection visa based on what I'm going to tell you. This is not an official advice from a lawyer. What this is basically some guidelines to assist you to make a decision whether you should or should not seek legal advice to apply for protection visa. It's very important that you realize this because there is a lot more to this than what I'm about to tell you. And applying for protection is a very serious thing, because if you don't meet the definition of a refugee, or Australia's protection obligations don't extend to you. If the department doesn't give you a protection visa, you have ruined your chances with the Australian government and never having a visa. It becomes very difficult. So let's look at what a refugee is. When someone comes in for advice, the first thing that we do is we look at whether a person meets the definition. Under Australian law, a refugee is a person who fears harm, and the fear is based on 5 convention reasons. Now, those reasons are race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or imputed political opinion. Now, what does that mean? Let's go through the... That means that a visa is issued to someone who is assessed to meet Australia's protection obligations. When a person applies for protection, a case officer assesses whether they meet the criteria, and on that basis, on the assessment of the criteria under the law, they are decided whether they're given a visa. Now, the next slide explains the next set of laws that are there if you don't meet the Australia's protection obligations on the convention grounds. Now, the convention is rather old, so Australia changed its laws to include complementary protection. What complementary protection means is that if you don't meet the definition on the 5 grounds, and if you still are in danger of suffering harm if you go back outside of these 5 grounds that I mentioned, then you may still get a protection visa. Now, whether you meet those criteria or not, it depends again on a number of treaties that Australia is a signatory to, and a lot of these are dependent on whether you are likely to suffer significant harm if you go back. Now, who can apply? The next slide will explain who can apply. People who have fled their country for better economic opportunities, they do not, I repeat again, they do not apply. It doesn't apply to them. So please don't apply if your reasons for applying for protection is for economic reasons only. Also, if you're staying here and you want to apply because of COVID, unfortunately, it doesn't meet the criteria. If you can safely relocate somewhere else in your country, you also cannot apply, or you might be refused. If your country can protect you, then you also should not be applying. People who have another visa to another country, either temporary for a long time or permanently, they also cannot apply, especially if that country is a safe country. Now, you must also note that the thing that you fear harm from must be persecutory. It cannot be discriminatory. People suffer from discrimination all the time. In Australia, people suffer from discrimination every now and then. So it is important that the thing that you suffer harm from must be serious. It can't just be discriminatory. The other thing to note is people who have serious character issues, although they might be found to be a refugee, they might not be given a visa. Just something to watch out for. Now, before you apply for a visa, you must consider all options. It's not just a matter of, yes, I meet this definition, I can apply. There are a number of things when people come in for a consultation we do. We first look at whether there are other options available to them. Now, like I said before, it is crucial that you seek legal advice, because a lot of our clients, they increase their chances by tenfold if they come to us before they apply, and we assist them with the application. Sometimes some people can't afford it, so we provide some kind of advice and tell them this is what you should be doing. That is also helpful, but people with full legal advice have the highest chances to be able to get a visa. Now, let's look at the protection visa process. The process is generally, a person prepares the forms and applies for protection, and lodges the application. The form is called 866. You can also apply online. The protection visa application, once it's lodged, after lodgement, the person receives an acknowledgement of the application, and they're invited to do biometrics. Biometrics is compulsory. What it is you're invited to go have your photo and your fingerprints taken. And then typically the process from then on is dependent on the queue, how long it takes for you to be invited for an interview. It might take 6 months, sometimes it takes longer. It really depends on the situation and how busy the department is and how much allocation is given. I've seen some people get interviews as early as a week. Some people have taken 2 years, others have taken more. So the next step is you get invited for an interview. Sometimes after the interview, you are asked to provide further information with regards to that interview, and then the department makes a decision. Typically, if a decision is made that is positive, a person goes through health and character checks before they can be granted a visa. If a person in the decision is negative and the person is refused, they have a chance to appeal, to seek a review with a tribunal. The tribunal is independent of the Department of Immigration. However, they are applying the same law. So basically, you go through the same process all over again, although the process is much more thorough. What should a protection visa application include? Now, when you apply for a protection visa, there are certain criteria that you must meet, including you must provide basic information about your identity. You must pay the fee, the relevant fee. At the moment, the fee is $40. You must also complete the application form, complete it thoroughly, including provide information about the claims that you seek protection from. You must also provide full reasons why you are seeking protection. You must provide your identification. And what is now heavily the department relying on is accompanying evidence of your persecution. Things such as if you've been persecuted through the courts, then you must provide court documents, for example. And the place where we come in to help individuals is we provide submissions on behalf of our clients by undertaking research and pointing out, things that are important for the case officer that's interviewing you to consider. So that's where we come in. The other thing is that with regards to your statement of claims, there is an art to the way you put your statement of claims. It shouldn't be too brief and it shouldn't be too complicated and too lengthy, but it must have be written in accordance to the law. For example, what it is, who you fear harm from, what it is that you fear harm from, why can't you relocate, why can't you seek protection from your country? And it also should outline your convention reasons for your asylum seeking. What are the those 5 reasons? And so this is where legal advice comes in very handy, because I've seen a big difference between claims that have very good legal advice and there is very good lawyers who have helped them versus people who have lodged their own, or even people who have sought assistance of their friends, or even not a very good person who's helped them. And that makes a huge difference. And it's very important that your claims are very accurate and they don't have any discrepancies in them, or any information that is going to have double meaning, or imprecise things. How will your application be assessed by the government? They will look at your credibility. What that means is they will be testing you on whether you're telling the truth. Australian immigration officers are trained to assess you on how you respond and be able to tell whether you're telling the truth. Now, sometimes it's not very easy to do that. Sometimes they get it wrong, but there are some ways they can detect how you respond, and on the basis of your response, they will form an opinion. So it's very important, again, that you seek legal advice, because that comes in very handy. The other thing that the department looks at is based on country information. Now, officers are obligated to look at the country information from Department for Foreign Affairs. So, for example, if the Department of Foreign Affairs says if a person, let's say from Afghanistan, is a Hazara, let's say, when a person says that and you have identified them to be a Hazara, then that person should be if whatever they're claiming is correct, they should be found to be a refugee. Whereas another person, the Department of Foreign Affairs could say, well, a person that comes from the United States should not be found to be a refugee because America can give them protection. So that information is crucial, because they, whatever you are claiming should also match what the information that the department has, and also the information that is available through other agencies. So it's critical that what you say matches the information that is also available, because if what you say is opposite of the available country information, your claims might not be accepted. Now, to the next slide. Will I get a visa while I wait to hear the outcome of my protection application? Yes, you get a bridging visa. Like any other visas that you apply, once you have a visa and you apply for a visa, you get a bridging visa. It has the same usually conditions as your previous visa. It allows you to stay in Australia until your claims are assessed. The bridging visa doesn't let you travel, but you can apply to travel. Also, you cannot travel to your country of origin. If you do that, you're basically saying that I don't fear harm. So just watch out for that. You are able to study, you're able to work, and when you have applied for protection visa, these things are available to you. With regards to the next steps, the approval or refusal. If you're approved, you will get a permanent residence visa, and you have a pathway to Australian citizenship. Please note, you must make sure that when you get a permanent residence visa, that you continue to be a law-abiding citizen and that you avoid traveling to your country of origin. If you do so, your visa might be cancelled. What happens if you are refused? Well, you have a pathway to appeal. You can appeal to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, which is the AAT. If that is refused, you also have a pathway to appeal to the courts, where they look at whether the decision was made correctly. If you exhaust all your pathway, you must return. Otherwise, the Australian Department of Immigration may detain you, put you in detention, and forcefully return you to your country of origin. This is why there's a big risk with applying the protection visa without legal assistance, because sometimes it ends up backfiring on a person. Now, I understand some of you may have asked or would be interested in the Myanmar situation. I do have a few things to say about that. The first thing is that Australian government has previously announced that Myanmar nationals won't be forced or returned. So although Australian government has said that they won't be forced to return at this time, excuse me, they have also said that we won't give them any special treatment. There won't be a special visa for them at this time. Like previous times, other countries, they have sometimes Australian government has sought to give specific visas, but there isn't such a situation at this time. So government has said that we won't provide a blanket solution to everyone. However, we will deal with each person on a case-by-case basis. So what I recommend is that if you have a claim for protection, don't apply, because if the department finds that you don't meet the criteria, although they won't deport you, return you forcibly, they might keep you, and then once the situation in Myanmar improves, then they will forcibly return you. So just watch out for that. So we do recommend at the end of the day that you seek legal advice before you do anything. I think the floor is all yours, Melinda. We will have a question and answer session after this. So I hope I was within the time. I didn't go too long, but I look forward to hearing your questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Ramtin. That was really useful information, and I suppose it really demonstrates how complex the immigration system is in Australia, and why professional advice is really important when looking at your visa options.
Yeah, absolutely. Usually, the difference is that if a person comes in early to seek legal advice, we set a pathway for them, and it's very easy. But when they don't, and they have already set out a pathway for them, it's much more harder, significantly harder, to clean up after them and be able to set up a new pathway for them, because they've already, set a pathway for them. So it's much more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to put this webinar on is, I suppose, we were seeing a lot of people come through our program, which I'm going to speak about in a minute, as students or as people on short-term work visas, just kind of saying, yep, I want a protection visa, without having explored that there may actually be a better option for them. So this was really good to see that there are different options towards permanency, and that, jumping to a protection visa is not always the answer. So excellent. Thank you so much for that, Ramtin, and we'll definitely link you in shortly when we get up to the question time.
Not a problem. No problem.
So now I'm just going to follow on by talking about the Immigration Advice and Application Assistance Scheme, or we call it IAAAS because it's a long title. It's available for people who need to apply for a protection visa, which links into what Ramtin was just talking about. So I'll go through what the program offers, who is eligible for the program, and how to access the program. I'll finish off by briefly going through how to access other professional supports if you need to apply for a protection visa or another type of visa like the student and skilled visas that Ramtin spoke about before. So what is IAAAS? So IAAAS is a government-funded program which allows people who are already in Australia and need to seek asylum or a protection visa to access professional migration support. There are eligibility criteria to access the program, which I'll go through shortly. So SSI, we hold the contract for the IAAAS program nationally, and then we have service providers such as Playfair, who Ramtin works for, who deliver the expert services. So many people who access this program have come to Australia on student, visitor or short-term work visas. We've had people come through the program from a wide variety of countries. They've either come to Australia with the intention of applying for protection on arrival, or they've come here, say, as a student or to work, and while they've been here, something has changed in their home country, which means it's too dangerous for them to return. An example is what is happening in Myanmar at the moment. There's many, and I think a number of you online tonight from Myanmar who came here as students intending to return at the end of your studies, but the situation significantly changed with the coup earlier this year in your country. So we also have people accessing the program who have already submitted their protection visa application But when they submitted it, they didn't seek professional assistance, and now they're kind of reconsidering and thinking, actually, it might be good to actually get some advice from an expert on how to strengthen their application, or maybe they've received, been called up for an interview and want some advice on how to handle the interview. Another group of people who access the program are people who come on humanitarian visas from overseas and have had their visa cancelled due to character issues. They now need to apply for asylum as they can't return to their home country. One common factor in the people who access our program is that there are people who cannot afford to pay for a migration agent or lawyer as they're in financial hardship. And this is one of the main criteria to access our program. We have two service types. The first is immigration advice. This service type is what most people are eligible for. The migration agent or lawyer will meet with you and hear about why you cannot return to your home country. They'll ask you questions to assess whether your case is likely to be successful or not, and whether another visa pathway would be better suit your situation. The expert will then go through in lots of detail on how you can apply, what you need to include in your application, and what the process will look like. So like Ramtin went through tonight, but in a lot more detail and very specific to the person's personal situation. The second service type is application assistance. And this is when the migration agent or lawyer completes the application with you and supports you at your interview. They communicate with the Department of Home Affairs on your behalf through until you get a decision. Most people would prefer this service type. However, there is some eligibility criteria, which means it's more difficult to access. So let's get on to that all-important eligibility criteria. So for immigration advice, you need to have arrived in Australia on a valid visa and passed immigration. So you arrive by plane, you have your visa, and you get it, stamped or the scan these days, and you get through that immigration clearance area. So this service is not available for boat arrivals where people arrive without a visa. Also, you cannot have a current migration agent or lawyer. And if you've applied for protection before in Australia and received a decision, you aren't able to access this service. The biggest criteria, as mentioned before, is around financial hardship. You need to have a very low income, which means you are unable to pay for a migration agent or lawyer yourself. You need to provide bank statements as evidence of your financial hardship. So our team at SSI, which is Cora, Jane and myself, and hello Cora and Jane who are online tonight, they'll help you go through the eligibility process and support you to ensure that you have all the evidence needed to be found eligible for one of our service types. The other service type, application assistance, you need to meet all those same criteria that I've already mentioned, plus you need to be considered exceptionally vulnerable. What this means is that you need to have a condition or set of circumstances which mean you would not be able to navigate the protection process independently. This may be due to a serious mental health issue, a cognitive impairment, torture or trauma experiences, drug dependencies, or a combination of serious life events. So that might mean you might have experienced domestic violence, are now homeless, in financial hardship, and you have some mental health issues from the trauma of that domestic violence. So that's an example of the type of person that would meet that criteria. So how our services work, so basically you contact us and I'll give you the email address and phone number later. The phone number's on the screen now. But you contact and it will either be Cora, Jane or myself that will speak to you. And we will discuss whether we think the IAAAS program is right for you or not. Okay. If we don't think it's the right way to go for you, we won't leave you to, we won't hang up the phone and leave you on your own. We will make sure that we find out what kind of services would be suited to you and link you into those services. If we do think IAAAS is suited to you, then we will conduct the eligibility assessment with you. So we'll work with you so you can get all your evidence together, like the bank statements and any other evidence together, so that you can get through that and be found eligible for one of our service types. That's when we then refer you to a service provider. A service provider is a organisation or business who employs very experienced migration agents or lawyers. And when I say very experienced, not very experienced in all sorts of other types of visas, but really experienced in protection visas, okay, that they have been doing it for years. So Playfair, who Ramtin works for, they've been working with, supporting people apply for protection for many, many years, and they really know what they're doing. So that's the type of person that you'd have helping you, is someone like Ramtin. And they will either provide you the immigration advice or the application assistance, whichever you've been found eligible for. So here are our referral details on the screen. You can call us on the 1800 932 082 number. If you require an interpreter, when you call the number, whoever answers, just say the language that you need if you'd like an interpreter, and we'll call you back with an interpreter. Okay. We do have, if you go onto our ssi.org.au website, there is a kind of referral form you can do through there if you'd like, or you can just email us at info@iaaas.org.au. Okay, we will send these slides to you afterwards, so you don't have to remember these contact details. That should be helpful. Now, as I mentioned before, I wanted to talk to you about some other services that might be able to help you, because IAAAS isn't for everyone. We understand that, yeah. But there are some other free services that may be able to help you if you want to apply for a protection visa. They're on the screen at the moment. So there's a couple in Victoria. I think most of the participants today are from Victoria. So that's you could go to the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre or Refugee Legal. And if they've got capacity, that they might be able to assist you. There's a couple of different services in New South Wales, Queensland. I know we've got a few people online here from WA. A shout out to the people from WA. And Green Circle, I should correct that actually. That slide's wrong. It's actually called Circle Green, is the community legal centre that can help there. When I say that there's those free services, they're not open to, not everyone's necessarily eligible, and they don't necessarily all have the capacity to help everyone right at that time that you might need the help. You also, if you're applying for a different type of visa that's not a protection visa, those services that I had listed are not going to be able to help you. So that's when you're going to be needing to look at paying, for a fee for migration services. So how do you find a provider? Okay, there's two types. So there's migration agents and there's migration lawyers. For migration agents, there is a website, it's a government website, mara.gov.au, where you can search for a migration agent in your area. With lawyers, it's a little bit different. Each state has a different website where you can search for a migration lawyer that's experienced near you. We'll send those details out with you after the webinar. So you've got the websites. Okay. how do you find a provider that you can trust? Now, this is the difficult question. You need to make sure that they're registered. So a migration agent should be registered with the Office of Migration Agents Registration Authority, so OMARA. Or if they're a lawyer, they'll be registered with their state's legal body. Okay, so and they should have a legal practicing certificate. So you need to check those things. Okay, there are people out there claiming that they can help you, but they're not actually registered. Okay, so check that. You should also look up on, when you Google them or if you call them, and find out what their experience is with the visa types that you're looking at. Okay, so if you're looking at student visas, or you're looking at protection visas, or a particular type of visa, make sure you find out how experienced are they in those types of visas. Okay, because as we went through today, that's only a very small amount of I suppose the streams of visas that are on offer in Australia. And so it's very complex. So something like a protection visa, you want people who are really skilled in those particular type of visas. Look at reviews for their businesses. Is important. We all there's all sorts of different reviews you can usually find online. Remember that the higher the fee does not mean the better quality of service. Okay, IAAAS is a really good example of that, because IAAAS is a free service, but we have very high quality services because our staff do regular training and are audited regularly to make sure that the services that providing are not just good, but they're great. Mm-hmm. Speak to others in your, ethnic and faith communities about who they would recommend, because, they'll likely be honest around, if they've received poor services somewhere, so they're of people to avoid. If you are going to need to pay for migration services, it's really important that that it's clear about what you'll be charged. So getting a written quote which outlines what the fee is and what actually you'll get for what services you'll receive for those fees. Find out if they'll do a payment plan, but make sure you know when your payments are due and you keep up with those payments. We've heard stories of businesses not lodging your visa application until full fees have been paid. Well, actually, that's quite common, but we've heard of businesses not even telling you, and so you've assumed that the visa application has gone in, but it hasn't because you haven't paid your full fees. And also make sure you're aware of any extra costs. So if extra services are needed, knowing how much that they will charge for those. Registered migration agents and lawyers are bound by a code of conduct, and they need to keep your your personal information confidential. They need to keep you regularly updated around your application, and they should provide you with information about how to make a complaint if you're not satisfied with their services. It's really crucial that you know that there is no migration agent or lawyer can guarantee a visa outcome. If they do, they're lying to you, okay? In Australia, it's the government who makes a decision about visas, and that can't be influenced by anyone, okay? Remember, visa processing can take a long time, and that's not your migration agent or lawyer's fault, and they can't influence this, unfortunately. It's also important to get migration support. It's so important to get migration support with your visa matters. We hear regularly of people making mistakes on applications or providing information which is inconsistent with previous paperwork you've done for the government, and the department deciding from that you're not a credible person, so they don't grant you the visa. So from Ram, Tim and I, one last time, make sure you're getting registered, experienced migration professional to support you when applying for visas. That's all from me today. But what we're going to do now is take some of your questions that you've written in the chat section, and then we'll finish off. So, Eilish, have you got some questions there?
I do. So how we're going to run this is we'll do a bit of a Q&A. So I'll say the question and then I'll just direct it to who's probably best suited to answer it. So at the moment we have 6 questions. So I'll start us off. So if a person has exhausted all options in the refugee determination process, i.e. negative at BIP, at ATT and at FCC, can that person apply for any other types of visas in Australia?
I guess that would be me.
Yes, Rampton, go for it.
All right. No. Short answer is no. And that the same thing applies with any person, not just protection visa. And the reason for that is because it's a particular section of law that says if a person is refused a visa in Australia and the person doesn't have a substantive visa, then the person cannot apply for another visa in Australia. And the person, by way of that, by implication, means that the person has to depart Australia. Now, there are exemptions that applies. One of those exemptions is protection visa. So yes, there are certain exemptions that can be met where a person can apply for another visa, such as a protection visa again. However, the law also says that the minister must, in writing, allow the person to apply for another visa, which is practically essentially saying, no, you can't, because it would have to be a significant change in circumstances for a person to do that. So specifically for protection visas, a person can only apply for another visa if there's a change in circumstances or if they have departed and they have returned to Australia. But when it comes to other visas, because I know that this question doesn't specifically cover protection visas specifically, I'll also answer that as well. So if a person have exhausted all their options, then the only option for them is either to go to the minister and seek the minister's discretion, and there has to be a very good reason for the minister to decide, yes, this person can apply, and it's highly discretionary. I've had some success when going to the minister, but at the same time, there's been times that the minister has said no, and the only option is for the person to depart Australia before applying.
Okay, great. So just building on that question, so it's a similar sort of circumstance. If a person has exhausted all options in the refugee determination process, does it negatively impact their travel to other countries?
Yes and no. It depends on the country. That's a very good question. Australia, for example, one of the questions on a number of visas that they ask for when someone tries to apply for a visa to Australia, it says, have you applied for any other visa to Australia? And those are one of the standard questions that a person must answer. Then there's another question that specifically asks, have you ever been refused a visa? So if a person has been refused a visa, then that may affect their application to Australia. Australia also has a information sharing agreement with certain countries where they also check other people, on certain individuals. And that usually happens at the time just before the grant of a visa, where they do character checks and background checks on the individual. And one of the checks they do is whether they have applied for other visas to other countries. And if the person has not provided, correct information, then that might, affect the outcome of their application. So the answer to the question is yes and no. It depends on the country. And usually the person will be able to know in the visa that they apply for, there's a question that has asked whether they can apply. Usually the 5 Commonwealth countries, or usually the Commonwealth countries, they share that information. So I highly recommend that when they apply for a visa that they provide as much accurate and truthful information as possible, because that's a cornerstone. The worst thing you can do in Australian immigration and other immigration such as US, Canada, New Zealand is to provide false information, or not, put forward all the all the information that they ask for upfront to the department. It's the worst thing you can do. I can give you so many examples. I've had people with criminal,
records.
Yeah, that's right. So, and they have forwarded that information, volunteered that information early to the department, and the department was like, yeah, it's fine. Here's a visa for you. Whereas I've had individuals who've had, minor things that they've hidden from the department, and the department has prevented them. So please check that country and make sure the answers to every question that you respond are accurate.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you touched on the criminal activity, because that is actually a theme in our next question. So if prosecutions from the country of origin were a result from alleged criminal conduct, such as criminal damage/assault, how may the government view this?
Okay, let's look at this. There's 2 types of things. It depends whether the question is related to protection visa or non-protection visa application. So let's look at both separately. At the moment, any person applying for a visa to Australia that is valid for more than 1 year has to pass character along with health criteria. The character criteria requires a person who has had a criminal record of any kind that is subject to more than 1 year's worth of imprisonment to not meet the character criteria. You might have heard on the media that Australia is deporting, unfairly a number of individuals who were brought up in Australia, for example, to New Zealand, to the UK, and that has created tensions. That's because Australia has recently, in the last few years, has developed a very stringent criteria with regards to a person's character, and so a person that doesn't meet that character requirement may not get a visa. Now, so to go back to the question, generally speaking, and this is not related to protection visas, any person applying for a visa to Australia, and that, by the way, blanket, it includes protection visas as well, must meet health and character criteria. And with regards to the character criteria, if a person has a criminal record, then the department looks at it on an individual basis, and it depends on the criminal record and the circumstances with which it arose. I've had individuals who've had criminal records in countries that is not a crime in Australia, and that has been okay, even though the sentence for that crime was more than a year. So it was, heavy sentences, but because it wasn't a crime in Australia, Australia looked favorably upon it. However, it is something that I highly recommend that you seek legal advice for. Again, back to the theme of seeking legal advice. With regards to protection visas, because you've said if prosecution from the country, so I'm assuming that this is also a protection visa related question. Now, I've had many clients that the basis of their protection is prosecution from that state. Now, it also depends on the prosecution and the type of behavior that the person, or the criminal conduct, the adverse information, I guess. If a person is being prosecuted for political reasons and they have there's a criminal record for political reasons behind it, then the department looks favorably upon it and it's not a big issue. Where it makes a big difference is if the criminal conduct is related to a serious crime in Australia. Australia takes war crimes, gender-based crimes, sexual-based crimes, they're very seriously. These are things that, even though a person may be found to be a refugee, they may not necessarily get a visa in Australia because they won't pass the character test. So to go back to the question again, it really depends on the type of crime, the type of visa, and the length of the sentence, and whether that crime is a crime in Australia, whether that whether there are mitigating circumstances around that. So I've helped many individuals with such circumstances. Some of them have gotten through successfully. However, there is a line with which Australian government has got that you can't cross. And for that reason, again, I go back to my original advice: seek legal advice with regards to what type of issue it is.
Okay, great. Next one, we'll just pivot. So could you please talk about the visa subclass 200 to 204 and which organisations in Australia can offer sponsorship for these applicants?
Okay, good question. The organisations in Australia, they vary, and you can find them on the department website. There are a number of organisations that provide that. I can't remember them on top of my head. At the moment, I believe there's about a handful, 5 or 6 of them. But there are some developments with regards to this. If you Google search 200 visa subclasses on the news, you might see news about Australia wanting to expand that, and there might be a possibility of the expansion of the number of organizations with that. Now,
sorry to interrupt. Are you talking about the community support program?
Community support program.
Yeah, just sorry to jump in, Ramtin. So SSI, so the organisation that I work for, we are a community support program provider in terms of, we can work with people who are interested on that, but we can also provide you a list of ones in your state if you don't want to go through SSI.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Melinda, for that. The other thing that I want to add is that you don't have to necessarily go to those organizations if you want to sponsor someone. If you have the ability to do that yourself and the department is satisfied that you're able to sponsor that individual and the commitment that you can provide and that you have the means to do so, you can also sponsor an individual on an individual basis. Although I have to say, going through an organization has been more successful because they have a higher track record of, with the department where a person can be. Melinda, do you have anything else to add to this question by any chance, in addition to what you've...
I suppose, running on from your point, so there are the current community support program. I mean, it's not ideal or easy, and it's very expensive. Way of sponsoring people to come, but the Department of Home Affairs has received like a lot of SSI along with other organisations have kind of put in some information about how the program could be improved to better cater for what the community needs, and that has been looked on favourably by the Department of Home Affairs, and they are reviewing the program at the moment. So there will be change hopefully to come, but as it stands at the moment, please yell out to SSI if it's something you want to find out further information on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I do recommend the person that asked the question to contact SSI to seek further information because, having a bit of experience with that type of visa, the number of applicants that apply for this visa from offshore is a lot, and the places are very limited. So to increase your chances, I highly recommend that you seek further advice from SSI and to increase the chances of the individual that you have in mind. Back to you, Aisha. Is there...
Yes. So due to COVID, how can you apply for the offshore visa? Can you get the exemption to apply onshore?
Oh, very good question. So due to COVID, can you apply from offshore?
Yeah, or for an offshore visa.
For an offshore visa.
Yeah.
Okay. Short answer is no. The department provided exemptions to some individuals who had before COVID applied for a visa and had to, for some reason they couldn't leave Australia to meet the offshore criteria. But since COVID, the department's reasoning is that, well, you know the situation and you should plan your circumstances on the basis of the situation that has risen. So for that reason, department does not provide exemption to individuals who, are onshore and they want to travel offshore. Now, I do need to provide a bit of background information why this onshore situation exists. The offshore-onshore situation, it's a very old system from the very old days where, a person had to be either onshore or offshore, and the Australian government rules distinguish between offshore and onshore rules. Now, if you look at newer visas that have come, they don't have that thing, that criteria, but still some visas still have it. With regards to the departure to offshore, a lot of the clients that come for advice, first thing, I recommend that you come for advice because depending on the situation you are in, there may be an option available to you that you don't have to. But generally speaking, a person has many hurdles to go through in order to leave. I do have some clients who have taken advantage of the loophole or the travel bubble with New Zealand, and they have gone to New Zealand and have applied, but I've also advised them caution because the travel bubble can always stop. And as you know, since we're in New South Wales, the best example is right now, New Zealand has suspended the travel bubble with New Zealand. So sometimes people leave and they get stuck. So I recommend caution. I recommend that you seek legal advice and have a good plan if you want to utilize New Zealand as an option to apply for an offshore visa. Sorry, what was the second part of the question, Eilish?
Just can you get an exemption to apply onshore?
Yeah, no, there is no exemption. And that's because and a visa that's for offshore, it is for offshore, and then a visa that is onshore, it is onshore. Now, there are some visas, such as the 482 visa, that a person needs to be onshore or offshore to apply. Now, the department is yet to make a decision because with that specific visa, there are a cohort of people who, after applying for that visa for 2 years, twice, they no longer can apply for that visa onshore, that there may be an exemption and that the department might provide for those individuals. However, if you're outside of that group, and for example, if you're applying for a partner visa and you have to go offshore to apply, there is no exemption, unfortunately, because the criteria for that visa is that you have to be outside to apply for it. So what I recommend is that you seek legal advice because you'd be surprised. You might have other options available to you, or circumstances might be different. So for that reason, I recommend that you seek legal advice.
Okay, great. So if you have a visa that's been refused, cancelled previously, are you unable to apply for a visa 408 pandemic event? Can you get exemption to apply for this visa?
Unfortunately, no. I know it's a difficult situation, and I know that the pandemic poses, unprecedented circumstances. But the pandemic visa, like any other visa, is actually a visa that has existed before for other purposes. And so what the department did was they said, we're going to create a new stream of this visa and we're going to allow people to apply. Now, the pandemic visa says you need to have exhausted all your options, that you can apply for any other visa, and you can apply, once you've exhausted your options, your only option is to apply for that visa, then we'll allow you to successfully apply for that visa. But that visa also has certain conditions, and that is that if you need to apply while you're on a substantive visa, and if you have been refused a visa, you cannot apply for that visa, unfortunately. So if you're in that situation, I highly recommend that you seek legal advice, because if you are in that situation where you can't depart Australia to that country because of the pandemic situation, then the department might grant you, by attending the compliance section of the department, a temporary bridging visa that might allow you to stay in Australia. Now, I know this is not, that is always granted to everyone as a blanket rule, but if your case is severe enough and the country of origin that you are in has got, at the moment is classified as a place where, there's heightened, wave of pandemic, one of the waves is going through that, your country of origin, then what I would recommend that you do is either seek legal advice or go to the department, to the compliance section, and you might be able to get a temporary bridging visa. It's not ideal. And the reason why, an alternative situation doesn't exist is because, well, the last time we had such a situation was about 100 years ago, and the situation was different. You wouldn't just, planes didn't exist. You had to take a boat to come. And so this situation isn't really anticipated. So yes, it poses a lot of challenges and questions for people who are in Australia. But and for this reason, I recommend that you seek legal advice just to see whether you have, you never know, you might have other options available to you.
Okay, great. So we have two more questions at the moment. So one is, there are some Tamil Sri Lankan people who came to Australia, and I believe they tried to seek asylum here unsuccessfully and left on a bridging visa. Is there any way out for them to apply for any other visa?
Okay, so can I just check with the question if it can be clarified? Are these individuals in Australia? You mentioned they've left, as in where have they left to? Have they gone back to Sri Lanka? So if the person can clarify whether
they're in Australia. Sorry, they're in Australia.
They're in Australia. Okay. Yeah. So I have many clients in that situation. It is really unfortunate with Sri Lankans because the Department of Home Affairs case officers are obligated to follow the advice that is provided by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, the Department of Foreign Affairs advice with regards to the situation of Tamils and, in Sri Lanka differs significantly to the advice that the international community gives with regards to the Tamil situation in Sri Lanka. Now, Australian Department of Foreign Affairs says it's safe to return, whereas the advice that we have internationally, particularly with the UK, it says that you need to look at it case-by-case basis, but the situation is still difficult, especially those who the Sri Lankan government has interest in and have links or perceived links to the LTTE or family members. Unfortunately, it is difficult for me to give advice with regards to that, given their situation and where they are at for each person. Unfortunately, with Tamils, once they have exhausted all their options, what happens to them is because the Australian government has some kind of agreement with the Sri Lankan government, those individuals are returned to Sri Lanka. I know there's a case that's making news constantly, but that those individuals, that particular case that's making headlines at the moment, that family, you may have heard, that was in Christmas Island, were returned to Western Australia for treatment. what I would say, and you might be in that situation where you've exhausted, just like them, all the situation. What I would recommend is, if you haven't already taken, legal advice, that you do so as a last option, and that's the first thing. And the second thing that I would say is, unfortunately, with Tamils, it is difficult to be able to argue a case given the current country information that's there, and sometimes individuals are forcibly returned. So, unless circumstances change, unfortunately, I don't have anything more than that to say, other than that you seek legal advice and see if there is a ministerial pathway available.
Okay. Just added to that, some are going through financial hardship as visa conditions say no work permitted. There's nothing.
That was a question?
No, I think it was just added information.
Added information?
Yeah.
So if your visa says no work permitted, it depends on the visa you're on. If you're on, for example, on a visitor visa, there is an absolute no. You can't do anything. However, sometimes, and this is where I say seek at least some kind of legal advice. I know it's a chicken and the egg thing. You don't have financial means to seek legal advice. It might be difficult, but one thing that we could do is, if you quickly explain to us, and you can come to us and I'll have a look at your situation. If the visa that you're on allows for a change in work rights conditions, then you may be able to ask the department to change the conditions on your bridging visa or your visa that you're on to be able to have work rights. That is decided on a case-to-case basis, but also it depends on whether you're able to change those conditions. For that reason, it's such a broad question, I can't answer it directly because people who are on, for example, visitor visas, you can't change that condition on their visa.
We can contact them directly, but they're on SHEV visas and bridging visas.
If they're on a SHEV visa, then you should be able to have work rights. If you do not have work rights, then I recommend that you contact us for us to look at, because SHEV visas, they have work rights, and if you're on a bridging visa that's connected to SHEV, you should have work visas, and if you don't, then I'm actually surprised. But if you don't, then one thing that we can do is go back to the department and ask for work rights to be instated or reinstated on your visa.
Okay. Next one is holding a bridging visa. How can I apply for protection?
If you have previously applied for a protection visa, you might be limited in being able to apply for a protection visa. However, if you're holding a bridging visa, there's nothing stopping you from applying for a protection visa. Again, before applying for a protection visa, I don't recommend that you apply unless you seek legal advice, because you might have other options available to you, and seeking protection might limit your options. I have many clients that come to us and ask for legal advice, and down the road, at some stage, some friend or some inexperienced individual has advised them to apply for a protection visa when they had other options, and ironically, they have limited their options, and they have come to us, and we would have said, okay, so your only option is to leave Australia, apply. So for that reason, if you're on a bridging visa, yes, one of the limited visas that you can apply for if you're on a bridging visa is protection visa. But ideally, I'm only generalizing my advice, because I also recommend that you look at what visa you had prior to that and why you're on a bridging visa, and on that basis, you may be able to apply for a protection visa.
Okay, great. So this one's a good one, actually. So a lot of newly arrived protection visa applicants, I'm assuming, may not have a bank statement. How could they meet the financial hardship criteria under the IAAAS requirement? That's probably best for you, Mel.
Good question. So some people don't have an Australian bank account, which makes it a little bit tricky. But what we do, we have a financial hardship form template that has a number of questions on it. So we'll go through that with you. It will get you to talk about your income and your dependents' income, your assets, any debts you've got, your daily expenses and things. So it goes in quite a bit of detail, and then you would sign off, and you'd actually need to take that to an appropriate person, like a justice of the peace, to get it signed off. So it's a statutory declaration. Basically, it makes the document a legal document where you are, stating that you do not have the financial means to be able to otherwise engage a migration agent or lawyer. So some people kind of go, oh, well, that's an easy thing to do rather than the bank statements, but it's actually, it's a legally binding document, and Home Affairs gets a copy of that document. So if you, down the track, you're saying, they're seeing bank accounts that you actually did have money back at that time, so it is important to be truthful, but that's a way around that financial hardship requirement of bank statements.
Okay, great. The next one is, can you please talk about the global talent nomination option?
Gosh. This is going to be lengthy, so I'll just try and summarize it as much as possible. The global talent is a new visa that was brought by the Australian Department of Immigration about 2 years ago. There are two streams. One is it requires you to be so talented that you're well known internationally because of your skills. And so you can apply just because of your things that you have achieved. There is a test for that. And so it's not very easy to meet that criteria. The second one is it has a lower threshold, but it requires you to have an employer. You need to be an employee in Australia, or you need to be a potential employee in Australia. So someone must be sponsoring you. And essentially, the criteria for these visas requires you to have a high income, to be on a particular occupation. There's a limited list of occupations and that Australia is interested in. You must also have a very high salary, or a potential for a very high salary that's over a certain amount. You must also be distinguished in the field that you are in, and that test is a difficult test to meet. But again, I recommend that if you think you meet the criteria, or you are thereabouts, you've got a qualification, you have a potential employer, or you are highly well known in your field, internationally even renowned, such as a handful of people, then I recommend that you contact us for that chance to apply for that visa.
Okay, great. So we'll probably have time for two more questions. The first one is, which I think I can probably answer, is there a recording of this? Because it's been hard for some people to grasp everything that we've listened to today. My understanding is that, yes, there is a recording, and that we will be sending around the slides after this, but we will also try to put together the recording and the video and send around the link of that as well in those different languages. So wait eagerly by your emails for that info to come through. And then the last question is, after applying and while waiting for protection visa, it is said that the person will be on a bridging visa after the current visa expires. Will that bridging visa condition allow for study, work and health rights if the person is previous visa is a 485?
Yes. You will have unlimited work. You will have, by virtue of applying for a protection visa, and that is the permanent protection visa, once you apply and once you're on a bridging visa, it allows for you to have unlimited work rights with access to Medicare. you will also have access to study rights. Just note that your study rights is not the same as the rights as an Australian citizen or an Australian protection visa permanent resident holder, which grants you concession fees. You'll still have to pay non-concession, such as an international student fees, but you can still study without any issues. So there's no restrictions on that.
Okay. The other questions that we've received relate to personal circumstance. So I have been responding in the chat, and I'll just reiterate that if you put in a question that has specific circumstance, we will reach out after this webinar, so at some stage tomorrow or early next week, to answer those questions for you.
Thanks for that, Ailish. There were some really amazing questions and really diverse questions that we got at the end, but actually quite common questions that we get calls about. So it was good to be able to answer those this evening. So that's all we've got time for today. I want to thank everyone that joined us this evening. I know it's quite a lot of information to take in, and it's maybe not the most exciting way to spend your Thursday evening, but it's, hopefully it has helped you to be able to try and work out in your mind which kind of direction you might want to look at in terms of your visa pathway, but also where you can get help if you need support. Again, going back to for the 100th time, we advise you to get professional assistance and advice around your visa pathway. I'd like to say a big thank you to Ramtin for his time tonight and presenting and his expertise on these visa types. It's much appreciated. I want to thank Ailish from Playfair, who has really helped set up the presentation, the webinar for this evening. I want to thank Jane and Cora from my team, who have also been a great help, and then thank 2M Language Services, and not forgetting that we've actually had 2 Hindi, 2 Burmese, and 2 Spanish interpreters working and interpreting everything that we've been saying throughout this entire 2 hours. So big thank you to them. As we say, we'll be in touch with more information to follow on from this webinar. But thank you and good night.